This is week 156, and tomorrow is the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. It's been a long week. The US held their first talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia without including Ukraine. Donald Trump has said some wild things. Elon Musk has retweeted some wild things. Putin has gloated. Ukrainians have worried, but haven't had much time to dwell as Russian attacks continue to assault the country. Let's start with the US-Russia talks. The US delegation was led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, CIA Chief John Ratcliffe, and America's Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who brokered the January 15th ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. You might ask, is Witkoff a longtime diplomat? No, he's actually a real estate investor and billionaire, and incidentally, a longtime friend of Trump. This is the first government title he's held, and he has no real political experience. This person sat and negotiated with Sergei Lavrov, who first entered international relations as a Soviet diplomat in 1972, and has served as Russia's foreign minister for over 20 years. Although people say that Witkoff's lack of experience is compensated for by his decisiveness in brokering the Gaza deal, the actual implementation of that deal hasn't exactly been smooth. Julian Barnes-Dacey of the European Council on Foreign Relations said that Witkoff plays to Trump's desire to have someone who can get things done in a transactional businessman style. Witkoff also recently brokered the release of Mark Fogel, an American who was held in Russian captivity for 3 years. Fogel is a 61-year-old schoolteacher who was caught at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport in 2021 with 17 grams of medical marijuana that had been prescribed to him the previous year. He was traded this month for Alexander Vinnik, a Russian computer expert who had been arrested on crypto-related charges involving the laundering of billions of dollars. While I'm glad that Mark Fogel is home for his own sake, it's dubious to say that this was a diplomatic home run for Witkoff. We got back a probably well-meaning civilian who made an extreme lapse in judgment, and Russia got back an actual criminal. Anyway, back to Saudi Arabia. Not too much concrete came from the talks, as could be expected. Both sides seemed relatively pleased with how it went. Both Trump and Putin indicated that they are taking steps to speak face-to-face soon. Ukraine and Europe expressed dismay that they were not included in the talks. And what could be said to be the outcome at this point? A US congressional official told NBC on Tuesday night that whatever is said in talks, there's zero intelligence to indicate that Putin is interested in cutting a deal at this time, with another pointing out that Putin currently thinks he's winning. This was echoed by UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who heard Lavrov address a closed-door gathering of the G20 foreign ministers on Thursday night, and emerged afterwards saying he saw no sign that Russia is currently willing to negotiate for peace. As I say almost every week, we have no reason to believe that Putin would be satisfied with the parts of Ukraine that his troops already occupy if he believes that he can capture even the tiniest bit more. Make no mistake that his ultimate goal is to occupy this country in its entirety. And then there's this ongoing debate about Ukraine's minerals and their potential role as leverage in upcoming peace negotiations. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says that Trump is frustrated that Zelensky doesn't act more grateful towards him after Trump claimed that Ukraine owes America $500 billion worth of Ukrainian resources in exchange for military aid given. To be clear, America has not given Ukraine $500 billion in military aid, and Trump's demands on Ukraine's resources are far from straightforward. I will be handing it over to my colleague, business reporter Dominic Culverwell, who has been covering this topic, to explain what this debate is really about.
The US and Ukraine are very close to signing a deal on Ukraine's natural resources. For the entire month, Donald Trump has been obsessing over Ukraine's critical minerals and rare earths, saying that he wants $500 billion worth to recoup the aid that the US has given to Ukraine. The deal has not gone down well so far. An initial proposal was leaked earlier this week, and it showed that the US had bigger interest than just minerals and rare earths. Instead, the US proposed a 50% share in Ukraine's natural resources, including the big money makers, oil and gas, as well as a stake in critical infrastructure and port infrastructure. But Zelensky turned down the deal, saying that it didn't offer any security guarantees, something the Ukrainian side has stressed is of the utmost importance if it is to sign an agreement. In Ukraine, the deal was slammed as being neo-colonial. Essentially, the US seemed to be wanting everything but offering nothing in return. The US side is getting a little irritated with how long it's taking Kyiv to sign the agreement. The initial proposal was handed over on the 12th of February. While negotiations are underway, we still don't know exactly what the deal will entail, and we'll learn more in the next few days. But one thing is for certain, and that is Ukraine desperately wants security guarantees to make sure Russia doesn't advance its aggression.
Now, let's get to the other things Trump said this week. He made various incendiary social media posts before and after the US delegation met with the Russians, blatantly denigrating Ukraine and in particular President Zelensky. Notable highlights included blaming Ukraine for starting the war, as well as calling Zelensky a dictator and accusing him of being an illegitimate leader who refuses to hold elections. Obviously, there has been heavy pushback to this, as well as thorough debunking. This video emerged after Trump claimed that Zelensky was sleepy and uncommunicative during his last meeting with the U.S. Treasury Secretary.
Scott Bessent actually went there and was treated rather rudely. He went there to get a document signed, and when he got there, he came back empty. They wouldn't sign the document.
A poll published this week in partnership with the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology found that 63% of Ukrainians approve of Zelensky's actions as president, a stark contrast to Trump's recent claim that Zelensky has a 4% approval rating in Ukraine. When Zelensky pushed back on Trump's numbers and joked that he might want to check his sources, Vice President J.D. Vance said that Zelensky should stop bad-mouthing Trump. And regarding Zelensky's legitimacy, it's important to note that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are currently displaced from their homes, serving on the front lines, or living under Russian occupation, cut off from Kyiv, while millions are abroad, making it impossible to coordinate a fair and representative election. But even more damning than that, Ukraine's constitution literally forbids elections under martial law, meaning that in order to fulfill Trump's demands, Ukraine would need to change its constitution. Whether accusing Zelensky of being a warmonger, a dictator, or simply unpopular, the bottom line is that Trump has been posting unhinged, easily debunkable attacks on social media, ones that often mirror Kremlin talking points. And it's not only Trump's Truth Social page that is seeing increasingly Russia-sympathetic language. Media reported late on Thursday that the US was opposed to the term Russian aggression in the joint declaration now traditionally issued by G7 leaders on February 24th, the anniversary of the full-scale war, reaffirming support for Ukraine. Apparently, this year, American representatives have taken issue with any language that explicitly blames Russia for this war. Obviously, this news didn't calm nerves across a Europe that is scrabbling to coordinate contingency plans for a retreating America. On the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as the American president tweets conspiracy theories with seeming religious fervor, Europe has never been more aware of how vulnerable they are. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will visit Washington next week to meet with Trump to discuss peace in Ukraine, after both took to social media to reaffirm their support for Kyiv. Our War Crimes Unit is premiering a new documentary next Thursday, investigating the rescue efforts undertaken by Ukrainians in 2023 in the wake of Russia blowing up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant in occupied Kherson, sparking an ecological crisis while stranding many civilians in floodwaters. The film finds, perhaps unsurprisingly, that despite illegally occupying the territory, Russia offered no help to local residents, blowing up the plant and leaving them to struggle for survival afterwards. The film will be released on our YouTube channel. Subscribe here to be notified when it's released. Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, made his first visit to Ukraine this week, arriving in Kyiv on Wednesday with the stated goal of listening and reporting Ukraine's concerns back to the White House. Kellogg's visit came after the Russia-US talks in Saudi Arabia earlier in the week, where he was sidelined from the delegation in favor of less obvious choices. a worrying development given that he's one of the more Ukraine-friendly names in the Trump administration. While Kellogg was an obvious candidate to take the lead in talks given his position as special envoy to Ukraine, Trump instead appointed Middle East envoy Witkoff, who, as previously mentioned, stood out in his role as an unlikely pick in the negotiations. Kellogg met with President Zelensky on Thursday, a day after his arrival. They reportedly discussed the front line, security guarantees, and the much-discussed and hotly contested agreement on rare earth minerals. The two were planning to give a press briefing following their meeting, but it was canceled as, according to Zelensky's spokesman, Washington requested that no joint statements be made. During his visit to Ukraine, Kellogg also met with top Ukrainian military and government officials, but given his lack of involvement in the talks in Saudi Arabia, it's not totally clear what his objective was here, how he'll be advocating for Ukraine, or to who. Kellogg notably visited longer than most diplomats. Usually US officials are prohibited from spending the night in Ukraine for safety reasons, and it's hopeful that his visit shored up his will to push for ongoing support. I don't know exactly where Kellogg slept during his visit, but if he stayed overnight in Kyiv, I can almost guarantee that he heard some of the loud explosions over the city that kept the rest of us up on multiple nights. It's a bit harrowing that America's special envoy to Ukraine is returning home with a newfound knowledge of what Russian kamikaze drones sound like. But at the same time, it's comforting that someone on Trump's team has finally made the trip here. For as much as they have to say about Ukraine, and as willing as they are to tell Ukrainians what to do, very few are willing to put even 1 foot within the border. So, this is where we stand on the eve of the 3-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Only one member of the new American administration has bothered to come to Kyiv, while the others cozy up with the Kremlin. The President of the United States is claiming to his millions of followers that Ukraine started the full-scale invasion of itself, and that its democratically elected president is a dictator. As a Ukrainian American, there's obviously a lot that I want to say in this moment. Or rather, there are many things that I would like to throw. But the salient point is this. The past 3 years of peace in the West have been paid for with thousands of Ukrainian lives, a sacrifice that deserves more than the contempt that it now gets from Trump and his team. If you think that Ukraine needs to be realistic about ending this war, then I urge you to be realistic about the much larger one about to start. I promise you, you're not prepared. On a brighter note, a short film about the war won a BAFTA this week. In the acceptance speech for Rock, Paper, Scissors, Ukrainian actor Alexander Rudinsky dedicated the win to the defenders of Ukraine.
I'm gonna dedicate this award to my friend, Zhenya Svetlichny, who died in the war 5 days before we started shooting, and also to all those who defend and make my country independent. Thank you so much, BAFTA, and Slava Ukraini!
We're also looking forward to following Ukraine at the Oscars soon. Be sure to check out the documentary Porcelain War for a more uplifting glimpse at wartime Ukraine. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. At the Kyiv Independent, reader contributions are our main source of revenue. Let me say that again for everyone in the back. At the Kyiv Independent, we are primarily funded by our readers. Shows like Ukraine This Week are only made possible by the donations, big and small, of viewers like you. If you'd like to get more involved in the Kyiv Independent community, we have several membership tiers that give you access to our Discord community, Q&As with our staff, and a 15% discount on our merch, like this shirt I'm currently wearing. There will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.